Welcome back to the High Vibe Life podcast with me, your host, Moira Casaba. I am answering one of your most requested topics today. So many people ask me about how do we raise better mindset within our kids, or how do we raise kids with a better mindset, right? What are the tools, the tips, and the tricks? And we've had a lot of episodes where we've had mindset coaches on here. One recently was Brianne Smedley. She's an incredible mindset coach, and she has mainly training programs for young girls, but also she's just starting to launch boys programs. So we've had some of those experts on, and I've actually talked about this quite often, but I kind of wanted to just bring it all home to you today to give you both some really concrete tips and resources, but also to help you realize you're probably doing more than you think you are already. So I'll start with this. I hired a mindset coach for my son because I also know that they're not always going to hear it from us, you guys. They don't want us to sit down and lecture them and tell them all the things. And so when I hired this coach, I was so excited because this coach literally teaches pretty much all the same things I do. But hello, I had to invest in an outsider because I know my son's going to listen better to somebody else. As their first call started, I was at the bottom of the stairs listening with a cup to the wall. Just kidding, not a cup to the wall. But I was listening just to the first beginnings. And I was like, I wonder how this is going to start. I wonder how it's going to go. And the first thing he said to my son was, man, Vin, what is it like having Moira Casaba as your mom? You know, she does this work in the world. She speaks on stages. And Finn was like, fine. Like he didn't really have an answer. And what I realized was, because the next question was something about like, how much have I taught him or something? Like, you must hear the stuff all the time. And shockingly to me, Finn's response was, not really. Like typical teenage boy, right? And I, of course, immediately was like, oh, I'm really not teaching them anything. So that's the first nugget. Is I think a lot of people think like it's like the Tony Robbins show in my house, and it's not, y'all. I have typical teenage kids that don't always want to listen to me, that definitely don't want me to teach or preach to them. But here's what they don't realize. They know that I don't sit down and give them a PowerPoint on mindset. But it is the way that I operate. It is the way that I think. It is the way that I approach problems. And so by default, they are learning so much anytime that we talk, right? Even if, and my daughter, I've actually heard her say this to people, when Coco's dealing with something tough at school or a situation, I'm often quick to say, well, let's look at it from their perspective. What could be the upside of this? Is there a gift in this? So again, it's not a PowerPoint presentation. It's just woven in to me coming alongside them as a mom. And so, no, they're not like Tony Robbins, kids. They're not, they don't have like this. I think they do have a great mindset, but it's through the little tiny tiny grains of sand that are along the path than the giant sit down conversation. So I want to give you that. So a couple things that I would love for them to do, because this was another question I got asked literally this weekend in person. Like, Moira, do you have any books that your kids have read? I'm like, oh yeah, we have all the books. But have they read them? Probably not. 7 Habits of Highly Effective People is one of the best books written of all time. If you want your kids to understand people and communication and how to be successful with that, because really success is all interpersonal skills, it is one of the best books written historically ever. Well, there is a teen version of that. We have it. It's upstairs. I think I may have tried to force my kids to read it a couple summers ago during like quote unquote summer reading. So again, they're not gleefully doing this, right? But there is a little bit in some opportunities to be like, hey guys, it's summer. Let's read these pieces. And they might even just glance through it, and that's fine. I'm not holding it. I'm not holding their feet to the fire. Atomic Habits is another incredible foundational book that, when you start to understand the power of your brain, the power of habits, you understand almost how to be successful in anything, right? So I think that's a good teen book, even though it's not a quote unquote teen book. one book that I made my kids listen to on Audible, simply because I knew it was super short, super powerful. They can understand it almost in one sitting. You can sit down and listen to this. It's The Power of One More by Ed Milet. That book completely changed my life. And as soon as I read it, I also listened to it. I thought to myself, gosh, this is one of the shortest books and most powerful books I've ever listened to. This would be so great for my kids. And so I made them listen to that book. Now, the High Vibe Life Playbook. I wish that my kids did this work. I've actually never asked them or told them or forced them to do my own daily journal because I want them to come to it on their own. You know, I think it would actually be different if it was somebody else's book versus my own, but we do the work all the time. So people ask me if I would ever consider writing a kid's version. Y'all, it doesn't matter if you're a kid or adult, it's the same version. A kid's version wouldn't look any different. So if you were to do one thing with them that was to be beyond powerful, it would be to get them to do the work of writing out their vision, right? This is what we do in the High Vibe Playbook, reading it every day, getting rooted in that vision, those goals, that identity. And then, man, talk about building confidence in kids. If they start writing out their wins, and I did have this conversation with my son last night at dinner, everything would change for them, right? If they just understood a few simple actions could transform their confidence, their belief, and rewire their brain for success, more would do it. But we're asking those questions, right? How did you win? We're kind of pushing their mind to focus on their wins, to focus on the things that they're proud of themselves for, even focusing on the things that they're excited about, right? In the playbook, it asks you every day, what are you excited about? Well, it's very easy to be like, hey, you excited about the game tonight? You excited about the tournament? Versus, oh my gosh, are you nervous? Like, it's a big tournament this weekend. I bet you're nervous. We want to validate our children's feelings, but we don't want to push them towards negative emotion if they're not already there, right? A lot of times we have the conversation if they are like, oh my gosh, Mom, I'm so nervous. I'm like, did you know that being excited about something and being nervous about something, it's the same thing in your body that happens. So man, I know you're nervous. I feel that and I hear that. But like, what if you just told yourself every time you felt nervous, I'm excited, I'm excited, I'm excited, right? Help them rewrite that internal I'm nervous script. Sarah Blakely's dad, I love this story so much. Sarah Blakely, I think she's the world's first female billionaire, one of the most successful female entrepreneurs in the world. Her dad used to sit them down at dinner every single night and ask them what they failed at that day. And they literally failed the test if they didn't have something they failed at, right? He conditioned them to see failure as growth, to see failure as bravery, right? To see failure as trying new things. We are living so small as a people, right? We don't want to take risk. We don't want to fail. Failure is literally the path to success, right? And that's what Sarah Blakely's dad was teaching her and her brother growing up. In order to succeed, you have to fail. You want to fail, right? We celebrate quote unquote failure in this family. How different of a conversation is that? The other thing is I'm going to link you. Thinking about so many of you guys that I talk with have, boy or girl athletes. And, they might be in middle school and high school or college. And so Brian McCain is a good friend of mine. He's a mental performance coach. It's actually who I got my mental performance sports certification through. Brian Cain is so exceptional when it comes to mental performance for athletes specifically. And his podcast, y'all, again, in a perfect world, my son would listen to his podcast every single morning because it's like 5 minutes, literally 5 minutes, mental check. But Brian Cain has the resources and the podcast, I'll link it all in the show notes, that are just next level for athletes. And then Brianne Smedley, who I mentioned earlier, for female athletes, man, if you want an incredible coach, an incredible program for your girl, she's your girl. So lots of different resources there with the books, with the Audible, with resources if you want to hire a coach. encouraging the failure conversation, right? Encouraging the focus on wins, encouraging this rewriting of what we're nervous about. And remember that you don't have to go to all these extremes and do all these things. It goes back to Atomic Habits, you guys. It's not the big things, the big strategies that we're putting in place that change the outcome. It's the little teeny tiny seeds we plant along the way, the little tiny things that we shift, the self-talk that we shift, that we reframe, that we rewire. That's what's going to win out in the long run. Because yes, both of my kids think, oh, it's not that big of a deal being Moira Casaba's kid. They don't like acknowledge all the things they've learned because they don't realize what they've learned because they've just learned it along the way. They only know what they know. But I know that they're growing up in a home that is very different when it comes to how we think, how we then how we feel, right? Because our feelings come after the thinking. We can control our thoughts. We can't really control how we feel, right? But man, if we know that the thoughts create the feelings and we can control the thoughts, we are way ahead of the game if we are talking about just shifting the thoughts. Because when we shift the thoughts, then we shift our energy, then our whole entire life changes. So I'm going to link all these resources in the show notes below. Share this episode with a friend or all your friends because I know that these little nuggets are going to go far when it comes to our kids. And just remember, mama or dad, you're doing way better than you think you are, because if you are thinking about this question and thinking about this topic and listening to this podcast, you are way ahead of the game. So we will see you next week. Thanks for joining in.